July 2nd, 2022. 29 days before everything ended. Dominic Russo picked up his phone and started typing a message to the girl he had been with for 4 years. He was 20 years old, and he was trying to find the right words to say something he had been putting off for a long time. The message he sent that day was not angry. It was not cold. It was the kind of text that only someone who genuinely cared about a person could write, even while trying to walk away from them. He wrote, "Kenzie, you know I love you, but I don't think we should be together at this point. There isn't very much time on earth, you know. I'd like to think we could stop fighting, but it's a breakup fight every week. Neither of us deserve that. I don't want her to think I'm abandoning her. I wish it could work, but I don't think it's going to at this point, especially with the threats. We should just break up so we can both find happiness somewhere else." Dominic Russo wrote that text on July 2nd, 2022. He mentioned the threats. He mentioned fighting every single week. He said he wanted her to find happiness somewhere else. He was 20 years old, and he was trying to be kind about leaving. 29 days later, he was dead, and the person who sent that text message, the person he had been trying so carefully and gently to leave, was behind the wheel of the car that killed him. This is the story of Mackenzie Shirilla, of Dominic Russo, and of a relationship that the evidence describes as one of the most documented cases of escalating control and violence in recent true crime history. This is also the story of how the court system in Ohio looked at more than 93,000 text messages, security camera footage, black box data, and witness testimony, and reached a verdict that the judge delivered in language that almost no judge ever uses. Before we go any further, if you want to follow cases like this one, subscribe to True Crime Vault right now and hit that notification bell. We go deep on the cases that deserve to be remembered fully, with every documented fact, every verified detail, and every voice that the record preserves. Hit the like button and let us get into the story that Dominic Russo's family has been waiting for someone to tell completely. Dominic Russo was born on September 24, 2001, in Strongsville, Ohio, a suburb southwest of Cleveland. He was one of several children in a family that his relatives described consistently as close, warm, and present. He was athletic. He loved music. He had ambitions that went beyond his small town. He dreamed of building something in the music industry. He had interests in stocks and cryptocurrency. By the time he was 20, he had begun creating his own path. He had his own space. He was working. He was building. People who knew Dominic described someone who was genuinely likable, someone who was easy to be around, someone who attracted friends naturally. His mother, Christine, and his father, Frank, spoke about him publicly after his death, and what came through in every account was not just grief but recognition. Recognition of a young man who had been real, who had been loved, and who had a future that was entirely his until the moment it was taken from him. Davian Flanagan was born on March 11, 2003. He was the oldest of 3 siblings, and when he was 8 years old, he and his 2 sisters were adopted by Jamie and Scott Flanagan. He grew up in Strongsville and played running back for the high school football team. In the off-season, he worked as a youth swimming coach, teaching children something he had come to love. After graduation, he had applied to Barber College. He wanted to cut hair. He wanted to work with people. He had a plan for his life, and he was moving toward it. Davian Flanagan was 19 years old. He was 2 months past his 19th birthday on the morning of July 31st, 2022. Mackenzie Shirilla was born on August 2nd, 2004, in Strongsville. She was active on social media, particularly TikTok, where she documented her life and had developed a following. Companies sent her clothing samples to review. She had a visible presence in her school community. She and Dominic Russo had been in a relationship since she was approximately 13 years old, and he was 16. A relationship that would span 4 turbulent years before it ended in the early morning hours of a summer day on a quiet road in an Ohio business park. Now let us talk about those 4 years, because the relationship between Mackenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo was not simply a difficult young romance that ended badly. What the court record shows, what the 93,000 text messages reviewed at trial documented, what witness testimony described in open court, is a relationship characterized by escalating conflict, documented threats, and a pattern of behavior that multiple people around Dominic recognized as dangerous long before the morning of July 31st. The texts that have been released publicly since the Netflix documentary The Crash debuted in May 2026 paint a picture of two people who loved each other and fought each other in cycles that grew more dangerous over time. As early as August 2021, Russo texted Shirilla after an argument in which he alleged she had threatened to stab him in the eye after he made a joke she did not like. In March 2022, Russo sent messages accusing Shirilla of becoming physically violent during a conflict. He described her pulling his hair, threatening to key his car, threatening to damage his home, and refusing to let him out of the vehicle. He wrote that he could not feel safe in the relationship unless she could guarantee that the threats and the property damage would stop. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern that Dominic's family watched develop over months. His mother, Christine, testified at trial that in the 6 months leading up to the crash, the relationship had become increasingly volatile, that there were escalating arguments, repeated breakups, and a growing sense among those closest to Dominic that something was seriously wrong. She described Mackenzie as becoming more possessive of Dominic, more controlling, more unpredictable. And then there is July 17, 2022, 2 weeks before the crash, an incident that was documented in court filings and that prosecutors described as one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the entire case. On July 17th, Mackenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo were driving together on Interstate 71 in Ohio. They got into an argument. Dominic called his mother and asked to be picked up. Christine sent a family friend to retrieve him. That friend was on the phone with Dominic when the situation escalated. And according to court testimony and prosecutor filings, the friend heard Mackenzie Shirilla say, while Dominic was in the passenger seat of a moving vehicle, the words, "I will crash this car right now." When the friend arrived to pick Dominic up, his car was pulled over on the side of the road. The passenger door was open, and the friend observed Mackenzie striking Dominic with both hands. Dominic got out of the car and left with his friend. 2 weeks later, prosecutors argued Mackenzie Shirilla did exactly what she had threatened to do on July 17th. The only difference was that this time, Davian Flanagan was in the back seat. The night of July 30th and the early morning hours of July 31st, 2022, Mackenzie, Dominic, and Davian had spent the evening together. They went to a graduation party at a friend's home. They moved on to another location. They were together through the night. In the very early morning hours, the three of them got into Mackenzie's 2018 Toyota Camry. Dominic was in the front passenger seat. Davian was in the back. Mackenzie was behind the wheel. Security cameras captured what happened at 5:34 in the morning. The car made a slow, deliberate right turn onto Progress Drive, a road that leads into an industrial area of Strongsville. There was almost nothing on the road at that hour. No traffic, no witnesses. Just the car and the road and a brick wall at the end of a straight stretch of pavement. 1 minute later, a second camera recorded the vehicle traveling at speed. The car crossed through an intersection without slowing. It held a line. It did not drift. It did not swerve. It accelerated directly into the corner of the brick exterior wall of the Plidco building. The speed at impact was confirmed at above 100 miles per hour. Dominic Russo and Davian Flanagan were both pronounced dead at the scene. Mackenzie Shirilla survived. She was airlifted to a hospital with multiple fractures and underwent surgeries. She was the only person in that car who was wearing a seatbelt. In the hours after the crash, investigators pulled the event data recorder from the vehicle, the black box, and what it showed changed the direction of this case entirely. In the 5 seconds immediately before impact, the accelerator pedal was pressed to full capacity, maximum engagement, and the service brake pedal was not applied at any point during those 5 seconds. Not once, not a partial touch. The car did not slow down. It did not hesitate. It did not show any mechanical sign of a driver who had lost control. It showed sustained full acceleration through to the moment of impact. A certified forensic mechanic expert named Mark Sargent testified at trial that the vehicle itself had no defects, no mechanical failure of any kind. The car was operating exactly as it was designed to operate. What the black box recorded was not a malfunction. It was a choice made by the person behind the wheel. Now here is the piece that the public conversation about this case, and to some extent the Netflix documentary, has not always given the full weight it deserves. Mackenzie Shirilla's defense argued that she suffered a medical episode. She has been diagnosed with a condition called POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, a real condition that affects blood pressure regulation and can in some cases cause lightheadedness or fainting. Her mother testified that Mackenzie had experienced fainting episodes before. The defense argued she may have lost consciousness at the wheel and had no awareness of what happened. But here is what the black box says about that theory. A person who has lost consciousness does not maintain sustained full-pressure contact with an accelerator pedal. The neurological and muscular systems that produce that kind of active engagement do not function in an unconscious body. The foot does not stay engaged at maximum pressure during a genuine blackout. What the event data recorder documented is not consistent with a driver who lost consciousness. It is consistent with a driver who made a decision and carried it through. And the surveillance footage adds to this. In the seconds before impact, the car navigated the road. It made the intersection. It held directional control. These are not the behaviors of an unguided vehicle. These are the behaviors of a vehicle being steered by someone who was fully present in what they were doing. The judge, upon reviewing all of the evidence, explicitly rejected the medical defense. Her conclusion was unambiguous. Investigators also found something else significant when they processed the scene and Mackenzie's personal effects. In addition to marijuana and related items, investigators found approximately 8 grams of psilocybin mushrooms concealed inside her clothing. Not in a bag, hidden on her person. Psilocybin is a Schedule I-controlled substance, a hallucinogenic compound that can produce significantly altered states of perception and unpredictable psychological effects. She was ultimately convicted on account of drug possession and account of possessing criminal tools related to this evidence. In the days before the crash, cell phone location data placed Mackenzie Shirilla in the vicinity of the crash site, not on the night of the 31st, in the days before it. Prosecutors presented this as evidence of prior calculation and design, the legal threshold required for aggravated murder in Ohio. The argument was direct. If a driver claims she blacked out and had no awareness of where she was, the last thing that defense can withstand is evidence that her phone placed her at that same location before anything happened. An unconscious driver does not scout a location in advance. Mackenzie Shirilla was arrested on November 4, 2022, approximately 3 months after the crash. She was charged with 17 crimes, including 2 counts of aggravated murder. She chose a bench trial, meaning she waived her right to a jury and asked a single judge to review the evidence and determine guilt or innocence. That judge was the Honorable Nancy Margaret Russo of the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. Judge Russo has no relation to Dominic Russo. The trial lasted 4 days. Prosecutors presented the black box data, the surveillance footage, the witness testimony about the July 17th threat, the cell phone location data, the text message history, and the full picture of the relationship as documented by people who had been inside it. The defense presented the POTS argument and maintained that Mackenzie had no memory of the crash and had no intention of harming anyone. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo delivered her verdict on August 14, 2023, guilty on 12 of the 17 felony charges, 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, 1 count of possessing criminal tools. When the judge spoke before reading the verdict, she used language that reflects how clearly the evidence had resolved the central question of this case in her mind. She said Mackenzie had a mission. She said the mission was executed with precision. She said the mission was death. She said the crash video clearly showed the purpose and intent of the defendant. She said Mackenzie had chosen a course of death and destruction. She called her a literal hell on wheels. A judge in a court of law, reviewing every piece of evidence that both sides presented over 4 days, described what she saw in those terms. Sentencing took place on August 21, 2023. Before the judge imposed the sentence, family members of Dominic and Davion had the opportunity to speak, and what was said in that courtroom that day reflects something essential about what this case has done to the people left behind. Davion Flanagan's sister, Davine, stood before the court and asked for the longest sentence available under the law. She spoke for a family that had lost their son and brother, a 19-year-old who had wanted to cut hair and work with people, and had been in the backseat of a car that night simply because he had asked a friend for a ride home. Dominic's mother, Christine Russo, spoke about what her family had experienced, about the calls she received from her son in the months before he died, about knowing something was wrong and not being able to stop what was coming. Dominic's father, Frank Russo, made a statement after the verdict that surprised many people. He said he did not want the rest of Mackenzie's life destroyed, that it would not bring Dominic back, that it would not make the grief easier to carry. He said he thought of her as a kid who had made a terrible choice. That kind of grace from a father who has lost his son to murder is something that belongs in the historical record of this case, because it tells you something about the kind of family Dominic came from. Dominic's sister Christine took a different position. She spoke out after the Netflix documentary debuted and made her view clear. She described the person convicted of killing her brother in terms that leave no ambiguity about what her family has lived through and what she believes. Both of those voices are real. Both of them are part of the truth of this case. A father's extraordinary grace and a sister's raw grief can exist in the same family at the same time, and they do here. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo sentenced Mackenzie Shirilla to 2 concurrent life sentences with the possibility of parole after 15 years. She was explicit at sentencing that there was a meaningful possibility this would amount to a life term. She made clear that Mackenzie had demonstrated no genuine remorse in her assessment of the proceedings, and she suspended Mackenzie's driver's license permanently. Mackenzie Shirilla is currently 21 years old. She is incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, Ohio. Her earliest possible parole date is October 29, 2037. She will be 33 years old. Now let us talk about what has happened since. Because in May 2026, the Netflix documentary The Crash premiered and sent this case around the world again. Millions of people watched it. It went to #1 almost immediately, and it sparked a debate that is still happening in comment sections and group chats and living rooms everywhere. The documentary presented Mackenzie Shirilla sitting in a prison, speaking in a measured and composed voice, saying she had no memory of the crash, saying she was not a murderer, saying she did not believe she was capable of harming the people she loved. For a significant number of viewers, that presentation created doubt. What followed the documentary's release added significant new context to the public understanding of this case. Text messages between Dominic and Mackenzie, drawn from the 93,000 messages reviewed during trial, were released publicly and reported on by People magazine, TMZ, News Nation, Oxygen, and other major outlets. Those messages included the July 2nd breakup text Dominic sent, in which he specifically mentioned the threats as one of the reasons he needed to leave the relationship. They included earlier messages from 2021 and 2022, documenting specific incidents of conflict in Dominic's own words. They showed a young man who was trying, repeatedly and patiently, to communicate what was happening to him and to find a way out of a dynamic that had become genuinely frightening. Dominic Russo wrote in July 2022, 29 days before he died, that there was not very much time on earth. He was not speaking prophetically. He was a 20-year-old trying to tell the girl he loved that life was short, and they should not spend it fighting every week. But the words sit differently now. Following the documentary, a former inmate named Mary Catherine Crowder, who goes by Kat, came forward publicly. She said she had been at the Ohio Reformatory for Women during a period overlapping with Mackenzie Shirilla's time there. She provided documentation confirming her timeline and presence at the facility. She then gave interviews to News Nation and other outlets describing her observations of Mackenzie's behavior inside the prison. Her account described someone who was socially active, high-spirited, at the center of social dynamics within her unit, and who did not carry the behavioral demeanor that the documentary had presented. She said when she watched the film, the person on screen did not match the person she had spent months observing in the same facility. Kat Crowder is one person speaking from personal observation. Her account has not been cross-examined in a legal proceeding. Mackenzie Shirilla's legal team has not publicly addressed her specific claims. These are the appropriate caveats, and they belong here. But the account fits a pattern that prosecutors had argued throughout the entire trial, that there was a gap between the public presentation of grief and remorse and the private behavioral reality, the modeling agency emails, the concert, the Halloween photos, and now an account from inside the facility itself. Steve Shirilla, Mackenzie's father, appeared prominently in the Netflix documentary and spoke passionately about his belief in his daughter's innocence. Within days of the premiere, he was placed on administrative leave from his position as a teacher at Mary Queen of Peace School, a Catholic elementary school in Cleveland. The Catholic Diocese of Cleveland confirmed the leave. The school communicated with parents that it was reviewing conduct that it described as demonstrating poor judgment. Steve Shirilla told local news he believed things had been taken out of context. He has consistently maintained, as he always has, that his daughter did not commit the crimes she was convicted of. On the legal front, every avenue of appeal has been closed. Mackenzie Shirilla's attorneys filed an appeal in October 2024. It was dismissed because it arrived one day after the legally required deadline. One day. The attorneys argued that 2024's status as a leap year should factor into the calculation. The courts rejected that argument. A second appeal was filed in April 2025. It was also denied. In March 2026, the 8th District Court of Appeals upheld the conviction in its entirety. The Ohio Supreme Court had previously declined to hear the case. Every legal door has closed. She will be 33 years old when she first becomes eligible for parole consideration. Whether she receives parole at that point will depend on a board and on what 15 years of incarceration produces. The judge was explicit that there was a real possibility the concurrent life sentences would function as exactly that. Now I want to come back to where this story truly lives. Not in the appeals, not in the documentary, not in the social media debate, but in two specific people. Dominic Russo sent a text on July 2, 2022. He said he wanted her to find happiness somewhere else. He was 20 years old, and he was trying to be kind about leaving. He mentioned the threats. He mentioned a breakup fight every week. He mentioned not wanting her to think he was abandoning her. He was not abandoning her. He was trying to save himself. And 4 weeks later, he was gone. What the court record, the text messages, the witness testimony, and the black box data collectively describe is not a mystery. It is a documented pattern of escalating behavior in a relationship that multiple people around Dominic could see was dangerous, that Dominic himself was trying to exit, and that culminated on a quiet road in an Ohio business park at 5:30 in the morning when there was no one around to help. The July 17th incident on Interstate 71, just 2 weeks before the crash, is the detail that should anchor every conversation about this case. A friend heard Mackenzie say while Dominic sat in the passenger seat of a moving car that she would crash it right now. That friend drove to the scene and found Dominic being struck. He got in the other car and he left. 2 weeks later, he got back in her car. That gap between hearing a threat and getting back in the car with the person who made it, between knowing something is dangerous and being unable to fully walk away from it. That gap is where Dominic Russo's story lives. It is where a lot of young people in controlling and volatile relationships live, and it is the most important thing this case has to teach beyond its specific outcome. People who are in relationships where control and threats and cycles of tension followed by reconciliation are the pattern do not always fully recognize the danger they are in. The people around them often see it more clearly than they do. Dominic's family saw it. His friends saw it. People tried to intervene. And it was not enough to change what happened on July 31st, 2022. That is not an accusation against anyone. It is the reality of how these dynamics work and why they are so difficult to interrupt. Recognizing escalating patterns in relationships, taking threats seriously before they become something worse, and building the kind of support systems that give people a path out. These are the lessons that belong in the conversation about this case alongside every piece of courtroom evidence. Davion Flanagan was 19 years old. He got into the back seat because he needed a ride. He trusted his friends. He had no reason to believe that the car he was getting into was going to be the last one he ever rode in. His family established the Davion Flanagan Memorial Scholarship after his death to support young people pursuing careers in barbering, honoring the path Davion had wanted to walk. That scholarship exists in the world now. It will open doors for people Davion never got to meet. That is what his family chose to build from the unbearable loss of him. Davion Flanagan deserves to be remembered as more than a name in a criminal case. He was a running back. He was a swimming coach for children. He wanted to be a barber. He was someone's son and someone's brother and someone's friend. He was 19 years old and he was going home. Dominic Russo was 20 years old. He had dreams. He had a family who loved him and whom he loved in return. He was trying to find his way toward everything he wanted to build. And in the weeks before he died, he was trying to be kind about leaving a relationship he knew was not safe. In a text message that mentioned the threats, that said he wanted her to find happiness somewhere else, that said he did not want her to feel abandoned. He was 20 years old and he was trying to do the right thing. That is the story. All of it. The relationship, the escalation, the threat on Interstate 71, the black box, the location data, the jury of evidence that a judge reviewed in full and described in language she almost certainly knew would be quoted for years, the documentary that reached millions, the text messages that are now public, the scholarship that carries a young man's name forward. The complete picture of this case is not ambiguous. It is documented, verified, and preserved in an official court record that a sitting judge, reviewing every available piece of evidence, resolved in the clearest possible terms. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan deserve that complete picture to be told, every time, with nothing left out. And with the full weight of what the evidence showed and the full dignity that two real human lives are owed. If this investigation gave you something to think about, subscribe to True Crime Vault and hit that notification bell. We are here every week with the cases that deserve to be told fully and told right. Hit the like button if this gave you the complete story, and drop a comment below. What stood out to you from the text messages that were released publicly this month? What do you think about where this case stands today? We read every comment and we want to hear from you. These are not just stories, they are real lives, and they deserve to be remembered. There is something that gets absorbed in the noise of a case like this one, something that becomes a statistic before it ever becomes a human reality. The number 93,000. That is how many text messages prosecutors reviewed in preparation for this trial. 93,000 messages between two people in a 4-year relationship, drawn from phones, reviewed by investigators, analyzed by legal teams, and ultimately entered into the record of a murder trial in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Think about what 93,000 text messages actually represents. That is not an exchange between strangers. That is the documented interior of a relationship. Two people trying to communicate, arguing, apologizing, threatening, reconciling, and beginning the cycle again. It is 4 years of evidence about how two specific human beings interacted with each other, compressed into a database that investigators had to sit with and make sense of. And what those messages showed, at least the portions that have been released publicly and reported on by People magazine, TMZ, News Nation, Oxygen, and other outlets, is a relationship in which both people were sometimes acting out of pain, but in which the specific pattern of threats and physical incidents documented in Dominic's messages points clearly in one direction. He was writing about what was happening to him. He was naming specific incidents. He was describing what it felt like to be on the receiving end of behavior that frightened him, and he was doing it repeatedly in his own words in real time over a period that extended months before the crash. The August 2021 message about a threat involving a knife. The March 2022 messages about being physically struck, having his hair pulled, being trapped in a vehicle, having property threatened. The July 2nd, 2022 breakup message that specifically mentioned the threats as one of the reasons he needed to leave. These are not second-hand accounts. These are Dominic Russo's own words, written in the moment, to the person he was writing them about. And then there is this, from the messages that Mackenzie Shirilla sent during the same period. Investigators reviewed her messages too, and some of what she wrote has also been reported publicly. She sent messages saying things that prosecutors described as concerning, given the context of the relationship and what ultimately happened. The full picture of the text record is that two people were in a deeply troubled dynamic, and that within that dynamic, the pattern of escalating threat behavior documented in Dominic's messages followed a trajectory that investigators and ultimately the judge found telling. Now let us talk about what happened after the crash, in the weeks between July 31st and November 4th, 2022. because that period is part of the evidentiary story too. After being discharged from the hospital, Mackenzie Shirilla returned to her life in Strongsville. She was active on social media. She made posts. She attended events. In September 2022, while investigators were still building the case, she attended a concert of a favorite artist in a neighboring city. She had not yet fully recovered physically and was using a wheelchair. She wore bright makeup, took photographs with friends, and posted them. Prosecutors later entered this footage and these images into evidence at trial. In October 2022, she attended a Halloween event. She and her friends wore costume makeup that gave the appearance of a corpse-like face. The photographs from that night were also presented in court. Davian Flanagan's father saw those photographs and described publicly how he felt when he saw them. He said that seeing someone dressed that way, 3 months after she had killed 2 people, sickened him to his core. Those were his words, and they are part of the record of this case. Also, during the period after the crash, Mackenzie and her mother sent emails to a modeling agency in Los Angeles. This was discovered by investigators and brought to the attention of Strongsville police by community members who had seen the messages. A prosecutor read from those emails in open court. The content showed Mackenzie expressing enthusiasm about a professional opportunity, thanking the agency, and indicating ongoing communication with them. This was happening while Dominic Russo and Davian Flanagan had recently been buried. A classmate also shared text messages with investigators that she had received from Mackenzie. In those messages, Mackenzie had asked the classmate to go to Dominic's room and retrieve photographs of herself so that they could be placed in his casket. Prosecutors did not treat this as evidence of grief. They treated it as evidence of someone who was managing a public narrative and constructing an image, while simultaneously taking steps that were difficult to reconcile with genuine mourning. Then there were messages Mackenzie posted on Dominic's online memorial page. In August 2022, she wrote, "I miss you, Nug. I still feel like you are just going to walk in the door any second. I miss your laugh, your perfect smile." She signed off using language of deep affection. These posts were public. They were visible to everyone who visited the memorial page, including his family. Prosecutors argued throughout the trial that the pattern of behavior after the crash, the social media activity, the concert, the Halloween photos, the modeling agency emails, the memorial posts, was not consistent with genuine grief. That it was consistent with someone who was performing the role of a devastated partner while operating from a very different internal reality. The judge, who had access to every piece of this evidence, agreed with that characterization. Mackenzie Shirilla has maintained consistently, both at trial and in the Netflix documentary, that she has no memory of the crash, that she does not know what happened, that she is not saying she is innocent, but that she is also not a murderer. She said in the documentary, with the composed and measured tone that many viewers found compelling, that she had no recollection of that morning, and that what happened was not intentional because it was not part of her character. But the court record is not built on what a person says about themselves. It is built on what the evidence shows, and what the evidence showed in this case: the black box, the surveillance footage, the location data, the text messages, the witness testimony, the documented threat made 14 days before the crash, was sufficient for a sitting judge to conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that this was not an accident. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo did not use the word accident anywhere in her verdict. She used the word murder. She used the word mission. She used the phrase prior calculation and design. She used the words death and destruction. She looked at the totality of what prosecutors had built, heard the defense's response to every piece of it, and reached a conclusion that she put on the permanent record of the state of Ohio in language that leaves nothing uncertain. There is one more thing that deserves space in this conversation. In the weeks following the Netflix documentary's release in May 2026, newly surfaced case documents were made available publicly and were reported on by LAD Bible, Unilad, and other outlets. Those documents included additional details from the investigation, including information about a witness named Deanna Faustnight, who had provided investigators with information about previous threats, and about the July 17th incident on Interstate 71, which is described in the prosecutor's filing with specific detail about what the friend heard, what he saw when he arrived, and what Dominic did afterward. The filing describes the friend arriving on the scene, observing Mackenzie striking Dominic, watching Dominic exit the vehicle, and taking him away from the situation. That friend later told investigators exactly what he had heard. And what he heard became part of the prosecution's prior calculation and design argument, the legal foundation of the aggravated murder charges. 2 weeks after that incident, Dominic Russo got back in Mackenzie Shirilla's car. He was in the passenger seat. His friend Davion was in the back. They were heading home after a night of being young and together and alive. And Mackenzie Shirilla, according to everything the court found to be true, drove that car down a road she had visited before, at a speed that ensured there would be no surviving it for the people sitting beside her and behind her. Dominic Russo was 20 years old. He had sent a text 29 days before he died that mentioned there was not very much time on Earth. He was trying to be kind. He was trying to leave. He deserved the chance to do both. He deserved to find the happiness he said he wanted for both of them. He did not get it. And the reason he did not get it is documented in 93,000 text messages, in a black box, in security camera footage, in witness testimony, and in the verdict of a judge who called it what the evidence showed it to be. That is the complete story, the full record, the documented truth. And it belongs to Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan.